Welcome to our remote Sunday morning services at Wildwood Baptist Church. My name is Bill Vest, and if you are visiting with us either on Facebook or these YouTube videos, I want to welcome you on behalf of the saints that meet at Wildwood Baptist Church. Now, the last time we were together, we looked at our church's particular definition for practical discipleship. That is, every member and mature minister involved in ministry. And we have been looking this whole time that we have been in quarantine, either through the Sunday services or the daily devotionals, at prioritizing our lives, to take advantage of this time, to redeem it, as Paul says. And we saw that the first priority in any life is to worship God. Now, to worship Him, we must know Him, to search the Scriptures, to see what He is like, to see who He is and what He has done for us, and then how we might emulate that, how we might be ambassadors of that in the world. Now, the last time that we gathered for a sermon, it was on the priority of worship, looking at Jesus's very last night with His disciples, when He celebrates the last Passover and institutes for us the new covenant. And I thought, as Easter was fast approaching us, and the sorrow that I will have if we can't gather together on Easter Sunday, I was thinking about the thief on the cross. And I was thinking how the message of Christ and what He does by His crucifixion on my behalf, by His resurrection, and by the resurrected life given to me, and Him taking up residence within me, makes new life, makes Christianity the exact opposite message of Ecclesiastes. But sadly, as I was going through this second priority of examining myself to see what is keeping me from being like Christ, I had to admit that there is within me a monster. That old man that has been put to death, but I still carry about with me. And if we are to be who God would have us to be, to reveal who God is in this world, then we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to be honest about ourselves. And as we spent our last time together looking at Jesus and how He instituted the new covenant, I thought that today we would look at ourselves as I look at the thief on the cross, and expose that monster and hopefully eradicate it even more from my life. Ecclesiastes chapter number 1. Solomon writes, "I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, it is all vanity, and striving after wind." Solomon concludes, after following at least 12 of the philosophies of man on the earth, his sad commentary, his sad conclusion to the whole matter is, it's all vanity. It doesn't really mean anything. Now contrast that with the writing of the Apostle Paul as he writes to the church at Corinth. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16 through 18 says this: so we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. As we look not to the things which are seen, but to the things which are unseen. For the things which are seen are transient, but the things which are unseen are eternal. Now, what you have in these two disparate passages is vanity being exposed and purpose being revealed. And the tone of these two writings are completely different. Solomon is in great sorrow. He calls it his sad purpose, this terrible purpose that God has given us. Where the Apostle Paul is the man who says to rejoice in the Lord always, regardless of circumstance. Whether we are in a time of abundance or we are in a time of great loss. To weep with them that weep, to rejoice with them that rejoice, but in all things have hope, and be thankful in all things, even as we rejoice. The message of the philosophies of the world leads to vanity, where the reality of what Christ has done and the great message of the gospel is that there is not only purpose to life, there is purpose to mine. And not only is there a purpose to mine, but that my life may have purpose. It may have purpose to help rather than to hurt, to aid rather than to hinder. Verse number 18. As we look not to the things which are seen. One of Jesus' most radical teachings, when you give it much thought, is he tells us to walk by faith and not by sight. It is an incredibly difficult thing to do. It makes a wonderful t-shirt. It makes a beautiful cross-stitching on the wall. But as far as practically applying that in our lives, it is incredibly difficult. That's why I wanted us to see that our first priority is worship. Because we will only walk by faith when we know God, when we know who He is, what He has promised, and how He has the power, the ability, and the desire to fulfill all of His promises. But Paul here tells us to look not to the things which are seen, but to the things which are unseen. For the things which are seen are transient. They are temporal. They are temporary. But the things which are unseen are eternal. Now, that first question that we have as we look at this passage, especially as we look at this verse, is why? Why do we look to the things which are unseen rather than the things that are seen? And then secondly, how? How do we possibly do that? Well, the first thing we have to do is to recognize that there is a monster that dwells within, or there's a monster within and within us all. We have to recognize that. The heart is desperately wicked and full of lies, and we can convince ourselves that we are great. I mean, I've convinced my wife I look like Brad Pitt and George Clooney's child. But we have to be real. We have to be honest with ourselves before we can ever truly advance in understanding our purpose or fulfilling our purpose. And so we ask these two questions. Why? Why look to the things which are unseen rather than to the things which are seen? And then how? Romans chapter 7, verse number 19. For I do not the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing. Now, if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me. So I find it to be a law that when I want to do right, evil lies close at hand. I, Bill Vest, pastor of Wildwood Baptist Church, I am a fool in my understanding of myself, in my determination to walk, in my own actions far too often, in my immaturity. As I looked this week at the thief on the cross, the thief who after mocking Christ, understood his own condemnation, understood the innocence of, and then ultimately the purpose of Christ hanging on a cross beside him. And as I looked at this thief and I heard Christ say to him, "Truly, truly, I say to you that today you will be with me in paradise," I heard whispers of jealousy. Why? How? How could this thief who has suffered for Christ maybe an hour or just a little bit longer than that before he dies, how can he receive the same heaven that I do? How can he receive the same promises of eternity that I do? How can he receive the same adoption that I do? How can he be a joint heir with Christ as me, who has tried, endeavored at least, to serve the Lord some 3 decades in ministry, have studied and earned degrees, and then even beyond that, studied the Word virtually every day, have struggled through a true understanding of myself and trying to do those things which are right, trying to tame the old man by moving ever closer to Christ and sacrificing on his behalf. How could this possibly be fair? How could God give the thief on the cross the same heaven that he gives me? In my immaturity, I look at the thief and I hear the whispers of jealousy. But even more scary to me was I didn't feel inadequate or insecure or fearful at the first understanding, at first blush when I thought those thoughts. It was only the power of the Spirit within me that rescued me from those thoughts and leading me down a path that would ultimately lead to my tripping and falling and losing my purpose and the meaning that God has for me in life. If I think that I deserve more than anyone, I reveal by these thoughts how crazy I think about things. It is by grace that any man is saved. None of us can find a way, if we are as wise as Solomon. If we do as great a things as Joseph, who rescued not just one nation but another. If we can write hymns like David, or if we can lead a people into a nation and create a nation just for God like Moses. If we can continue that message in the heart of great persecution like Elijah. Even men like that, even men like the Apostle Paul, like John, James, Stephen, They're saved not by the goodness that they do, but by grace, which allows that goodness then to flow forth. Listen, if Moses and Elijah, as great as they were, needed Christ to bring them into the promised land, as we looked last week at the Mount of Transfiguration, then surely I must understand that I too must be saved by grace. There is a monster that lives within me, though, that ruins my focus, that far too often stunts my growth and messes with my usefulness and my purpose and my revealing of Christ in this world, that steals the hope and the joy and the peace that God provides and replaces it with anger and jealousy and pouting. Rather than being jealous of the thief, as I thought more about this, rightly settled by the Spirit of God and by the Word of God, I began to understand that I probably had it backwards in my thinking. I am sure that if jealousy were allowed in this hypothetical, the thief would be jealous of me. I have had, and I am having now, and I will have until the day that my eyes close in death, experiences with Christ that he has never had. Hope when everything seems hopeless. Peace when circumstances cry out for chaos. Joy whenever trouble comes upon me, as David said, like waves of the sea. I have experienced these things, not just with the hearing of my ears, but with the experiences of my life. The thief's life was one of looking, like Solomon, in all of the wrong places, and finding the world and all of its pursuits empty and frustrating. So much so that he did not desire to find a purpose. He did not even desire to be good. In fact, he chose a path that would lead him to the harm of others rather than the help of others, because life is without meaning. What a fool I was to be jealous of the thief. He missed peace and love and joy, fellowship with God and with man. It is a wonderful privilege to be the pastor of a church, to be involved with, to be surrounded by the best people that a community has to offer. Fellowship with God and man, ministering to one another, feeling useful, and being ministered to, and knowing that others truly care for me. Living in this world, regardless of circumstance, with a living hope. Knowing the joy of God working in me, even when he has to take me to the woodshed like he did this past week. Seeing the enemy endure defeat after defeat after defeat. Knowing trust, knowing that there is someone that I can absolutely, unequivocally count on, not only to be there, but to be there with exactly what is needed for me. Knowing that no matter what, somebody loves me and will come to my rescue with the grace that is needed for the hour that I endure. How do we defeat this monster? First, we have to ask the question, why am I jealous? Why was I resentful? Because deep down, when I trust the mind of man rather than the promise of God and the presence of God, I resent sacrifice. And this resentment causes me to see the ugly and the difficult. It causes me to see the sacrifices made rather than the glories given. It causes me not to see the unseen beauties of what Christ has done for me, what Christ has done in me, and then what Christ has in store for me. As by his help, by his aid, by his wisdom, and by his leading, I am laying treasures in heaven. And as he will turn suffering for good and even greater glory in heaven. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse number 9, Paul writes, But as it is written, what no eye has seen, or no ear heard, nor the heart of man has ever imagined, what God has prepared for those who love him. Paul begins and ends this great chapter the same way. Verse number 1, eyes not seen, nor his ear heard, neither has entered into the heart of man what God has prepared. And then in verse number 1 of this chapter, he says, therefore, having this ministry by the mercy of God, not by my goodness, not by my sacrifices, not by my purpose, not by my study, not by my degrees, not by my sermons, not by my visitations, but by the mercy of God, we do not lose heart. Verse number 16 says, so we do not lose heart. Though the outer self is wasting away, the inner self is renewed day by day. Paul is telling us, don't look to the things which are seen. That is a vision which will blur the eye, which will blur the mind, which will blur our purpose, which will blur even the heart that Christ has regenerated within me. Look to the glory of what Christ has done for us, in us, what he has in store for us, and until then, what he will do with us. How do we defeat the monster? And how do we release the saint? By knowing this, you can't defeat it. I cannot defeat it. You can't defeat it. I can't do it for you. And together, we can't accomplish the task. But Christ can. And Christ has. He lived in this world suffering as no one ever has. Enduring the birth into the mess that man had made of God's world, and he pictured that mess by being born in a barn. And by those who should have known him the best and anticipated his coming most fervently, not even taking a short walk to Bethlehem to see what had happened. He endured the indignity of going to his hometown, and his hometown thinking that they knew a better path for him to walk than the one that God had laid out for him. He endured the religious leaders of his day, constantly trying to trap him so that they might kill him. He endured his own disciples constantly arguing about who was the greatest, which, by the way, is one of the dumbest arguments in the world. If you're in a group with Jesus, he's the greatest. And then by seeing his disciples depart from him during the night, every one of them denying him and every one of them betraying him. To my eyes, one of the saddest scenes in all of the Bible is Jesus, who went around doing nothing but good, who had healed whole cities, who had brought sons and loved ones back to life, had healed lepers, had given the blind their sight and the deaf and the sounds of their children laughing. Standing in an unjust trial alone. Witnesses being purchased to witness against him, but no one, not even Mary and Martha, whose brother was brought back from the dead, not Peter or James or John, who had seen the wonders of all of Christ's miracles. No one stood with him at his defense. He was all alone. And then all of that pain and all of that suffering compares to what happened following the trial. When he is nailed to the cross, and all of the wrath that my life, all of the punishment that my life deserves, when I made a decision that I knew I shouldn't have and did it anyway, when I openly rebelled against God and inadvertently rebelled against God, when all of the wrath, all of the punishment, all of the separation from God due my sin was laid upon him. And not only mine, but every man, woman, or child that has ever walked this earth. And he endured the full onslaught, not only of Satan, but the very wrath of God for me, for any who would call upon his name, and then by grace be saved as a gift from God, not as earnings for our sacrifice. Chapter 4, verse 4. Paul writes of those who have not yet seen this. In their case, the God of the world, the God of this age, has blinded the mind of unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel, the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Don't be blinded by the God of this age, the things seen. Find vision in the things which are unseen. Listen, Satan is malleable. He's wicked. His rules change constantly. They move every time, they change every time that the winds blow, and his rewards never come. But God is changeless. Paul says to Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse number 17, to the King of the ages, immortal, invisible, the only wise God, be glory and honor forever and ever and ever. The King, immortal, invisible, the only wise God, the one who is eternal, and who the writer of Hebrews says that he changes not. This is glory. Now move on to verse number 17. For this light, momentary affliction. Now for some of us, our affliction is great. How could Paul call it momentary? This light, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. Paul can call it light no matter what we are going through, because the response of God in giving us the glory that eyes not seen nor ear heard will be so great that the suffering will not even be a memory. will not only not be a memory when we get there, but there is help for us now as we look to the things which are not to the things which are seen, but to the things which are unseen. Chapter 1, verse number 3, blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies, the God of all comfort. All comfort, not partial peace. Hebrews chapter 12, verse number 2, looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher, perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. Yes, despising the shame, but now is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. If the key is seeing the unseen, then how do you see the unseen? As we look to the things which are unseen, the things that are eternal. The answer to the question is finding what is eternal. If the unseen is what is eternal, then if we know what is eternal, God, the only wise God, then we know what to look at and we know what to look for in our looking. And by our looking, see. Now what has Paul said is eternal? God, heaven, the Word of God, the people of God, and the glory that he shares with his people. And all of that makes this momentary affliction that we are enduring light. And then he says in chapter 3, verse number 18, but we all with open face beholding as in a glass the glory of the Lord are being transformed into that selfsame image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. Chapter 4, verse number 15. For it is all for your sake, so that as grace extends to more and more people, it may increase thanksgiving to the glory of God. Verse 18, as we look not to the things which are seen, but to the things which are unseen. Beloved, I pray that you would learn the lesson that God taught and is trying to teach me. Look for glory. And where you find it is in the eternal things. God and his work for, in, and through mankind. In his promises. Hopefully in the mirror as we behold his glory and are changed into the same. And then in our brothers and our sisters. Let us not be jealous, because none of us are saved by our own activity or by our own sacrifices. Let us overflow with thanksgiving, because we are saved by his. I thank you for listening, and we will continue to look at these priorities of life in devotions through the week. But more, I pray that you would pray for yourself, that God would reveal what is hindering you, that you might be a positive influence in this world, not controlled by the things which are transient, not being controlled by anger and blame and selfishness, but being controlled by the very Spirit of Christ, that we might make this world just a little brighter by reflecting his glory. Thank you.